Welcome, We Get Outdoors Nation, to this episode where we are joined with Alan Levinovitz, if I pronounced that correctly. Hey, Alan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Cool. Now, for the people out there who don't know who you are, what should they know about you? Ah.
They should know I'm a professor of religious studies, philosophy and religion at James Madison University in Virginia, and most recently the author of a book called Natural, which looks at the meaning of that word and the way it can be both valuable and deceptive in all aspects of our life, from what we eat to how we travel to how we raise our children.
Wow, and we're going to dive right into that. Now, the world's a funny place, Alan. I first came across you a few weeks ago when I was stuck in my car on a road trip for about 4 hours, and Joe Rogan's podcast was on my phone, and I found you on Joe Rogan's podcast. And I was like, oh, that's cool. That's really, really interesting. And it goes on for a while, doesn't it? Joe does 2 to 3 hour long episodes. And
He did.
And then about a week or so ago, my business partner, Mark, who sets up all the people that we get to talk with, said, oh, I've got this guy, Alan, who's got a really cool book called Natural. And I'm like, that's just freaky.
Oh, wow, that's a terrific coincidence. That was a great conversation. I mean, if you had told me when I was in graduate school back in Chicago for classical Chinese philosophy that now, 10 years later, I'd be on Joe Rogan talking about the meaning of naturalness, I wouldn't have believed you, but here I am. So, pursuing different areas of thought can take you in interesting places, and I'm very grateful to have landed on the privilege of getting to research the things that I have, because it's taken me, as you know, to a lot of very unusual places. So it's been a wonderful experience.
I was just going to ask, let's go to the beginning of where you started that little bit there. Chinese philosophy. For the average person signing up to go study something, it's not an obvious choice. How did you end up with that?
Well, I took an undergraduate, way back when I was first trying to figure out what I wanted to do as an undergraduate. I was actually very interested in bioethics, which in an interesting way, ties to my current work. And I started taking some ethics classes, some biology classes, and I realized that actually what I was really interested in was how people come to believe the things that they do, the most important things. How do people come to decide the most important questions and values in their life? And I thought that would be philosophy, and philosophy was a part of it. But I also realized that if I didn't study the religions of the world, I would be missing out on a whole set of ways that people talk about truth, that they understand the world, all sorts of stories and parables that aren't typically studied in philosophy. And in the process of doing a philosophy and religion major as an undergraduate, actually, as I said, San Francisco Bay Area, I went to college at Stanford. So I was right in the middle of the sort of tech world as Facebook was coming up. It was a very exciting time. And as I was studying why people behave the way they do, I took a class on a Chinese philosopher named Zhuangzi, which is a sort of old proto-Taoist philosopher. And I read that book and I said, I want to study this for the rest of my life. It just blew my mind. And that's what I did. So I did my PhD on this philosopher, and specifically his idea of what it means to play, and why you can think about life in certain ways as a form of play. And I was just fascinated by that. But I was also fascinated by the ways in which Chinese philosophy hooked up with other features of my own life. So for example, with this book, Natural, in the Zhuangzi, another Taoist philosophy, there's this word ziran, which literally translates as self-so, ziran, self-so, or so of itself, which is usually translated as natural. In other words, it's not altered. It is that way of itself. Another word you might use to translate it is organic. Things that are spontaneous, grassroots, all those words connect to this idea of ziran. And in Chinese philosophy, there was this sense, in certain aspects of it, that was a good thing. And so I say, it's really interesting that in all times and in all places, there have been people who have believed that what is so of itself, that what is natural, is uniquely better than the things, the artificial things that humans have meddled with. And so for me, it sounds strange. I love to explain to people the ways in which what may seem like a totally different thought world, it is actually really revealing of the shared ideas that we as human beings seem to come up with in different times in different places and still find incredibly convincing.
It's incredible. I tell you, one of the things that your book spurred in my head is, and I got all sorts of notes here, from Caveman Diet through to all sorts of things. But I'm pretty, I suppose in my beliefs, I'm pretty into the idea of my version of natural, maybe organic, maybe not. So I've got my version. And it was very eye-opening. When my wife gave birth, she wanted to have a natural birth. We both did. That was the deal. And you're there, and she was in labor for 22 hours, and then we're there and she's pushing, and they do something, and suddenly they find out that our daughter had her arm across her head like this and was stuck in the birth canal, whatever that's called. I don't know the terminology. And next thing you know, we're having an emergency C-section, and you're wearing blue scrubs, and there's drugs, and your wife's pretty close to unconscious, or mine was. And you get given this little baby, and so on and so forth. And I never thought I'd be that grateful for like that medical advancement. I'm not somebody to say that all vaccines are wrong and we've got a great immune system, so we should trust it. Like, I'm not that far, but I kind of had this thing inside of me that you should let nature take its course. But nature's fucking brutal, hey?
It is. It is brutal. I went into this book actually from a kind of opposite perspective of what you were describing there, which is that I thought, going into the research for it, that I would write some kind of debunking, and I would talk to people about how nature was brutal and terrible, and how this is just a form of superstition. I was going to be the Richard Dawkins of nature, but instead of God, it was going to be nature, and I would destroy people's beliefs. And you know what? I ended up changing my mind. I ended up talking to people who had natural births and wanted natural births. I ended up going to Yellowstone and doing solo backcountry. I did a lot of thinking and a lot of talking and listening, more than talking, honestly. And I came to realize that it really did make sense in certain important ways to want a natural birth, or to value things that are natural. And what I realized I was upset about was not that people valued nature or naturalness, but that they worshiped it. In other words, people weren't like you just then, where they would say, I'm simultaneously grateful for medical technology, and also I can value what's natural. For them, for some people who worship naturalness and see natural as a kind of synonym for purity, your wife's birth by cesarean would have been a failure. It would have been worse in a cosmic way than a natural birth. And that's what it was. I realized that I wanted to fight, but to value a natural birth is no less crazy than valuing the relative naturalness of Yellowstone Park. And I don't want Yellowstone developed into some kind of amusement park. That would make it worse. It would be less natural. And since what we value about Yellowstone, or what I do at least, is its closeness to this spontaneous nature that was so of itself created by forces beyond and before human beings, well, I get it. That is valuable, and that's incredible, and it's wondrous and cosmic and spiritual. It's just, understand that building a road through it or a handicap access rail doesn't all of a sudden make it unholy or impure, that we need to be able to hold those values in tension. And that's where I ended up at the end of the book.
Yeah, I got to the end of the book, and the two words that I had in my head was, it depends. That's like where I got that. I've got the notes in front of me. It depends. I suppose what I took away most, especially at this time of COVID, you've got the US elections coming up. where the whole world seems to be being pushed by the media to polarize itself. Like it's not all right to be a Democrat now. Now you've got to be like far left and off one side, and it's not all right to be a Republican. You've got to be like Trump plus plus. Like it's got to be further. And actually, there's wisdom and truth in both sides of that coin, the same as there is with maybe technology and development and something natural. And so I thought the kind of "it depends" was almost the bravest message I've heard in 2020.
It's certainly brave when it comes to book sales. I'll tell you that, because what people really want to hear is not "it depends." And I got this from editors, I got this from publishers when we were shopping the book around. What people really want is that Dawkins style takedown. They want the good and evil, natural and unnatural, pure and impure, because we are, as human beings, we're wired to reduce our cognitive load. And if you go into the world, whether it's trying to choose diapers for your baby, or food to eat, or a vacation spot, or a person to vote for, "it depends" immediately increases your cognitive load. It takes more work to make decisions in a nuanced world. When you have binaries, it's easy to make decisions. The entire world is simple. You feel good about your decisions. You don't have to put a lot of effort into them. And so there is something incredibly attractive in the same way, and I talked about this on Rogan a little, and this is actually the next project I'm working on, in the same way that junk food hits all the right buttons. It's easy to eat. It takes no effort to prepare. You just put it in your mouth. Your mouth says, "Oh, this is delicious. It's a Dorito." That's how these binaries work. Oh, it's natural. It must be good. It's unnatural. It must be bad. It's Republican. It must be good. Or it's Democrat. It must be good. Whatever, left and right. And it took a lot for me to overcome that binary. I mean, it took a lot of effort, but at the same time, I think, and I hope what my readers realize, what I realized is, it's the truth. The truth is that things are complicated. The truth is that it depends. The truth is there is no easy division between natural and unnatural. The truth is that there is no easy way to divide the world up into good and evil and pure and impure. And so once you realize that "it depends" is the truth, then I think then it becomes easier. But it really takes a lot to overcome the incredible pull of those binaries that are so attractive to us naturally, if you will. See, there's a good example of something that comes naturally that isn't necessarily good.
But it's also binary stuff is a bit like a junkie. It's a quick fix that can help us feel good, and the junk food can help us feel good now, but actually the long-term consequence of binary decision making actually is rarely what you want it to be.
I couldn't agree more. The collective version, and who knows, again, this is something I'm thinking about for my project, my next project, which grew out of this natural unnatural book, is what's going to happen to us as information technology allows all of us to be creating these binaries and liking them and sharing them constantly as soon as we have this world. And this is something I've talked about with the growth of the appeal of naturalness. A part of what's going on is that we're in an information ecosystem where it's very easy to sell things and sell yourself as your image is participating in one of these binaries. So there's lots of people who live natural lifestyles. It's a very easy thing to get out, and especially in a time when the authority of religion is shrinking. And I should explain what I mean by that. What I mean is, in the past, and this is something I talk about in the book when it comes to medicine, in the past, you might have gone to a religious healer if you were sick. And you would go to that healer not just to be healed, but you would go to that healer for an explanation of why you were sick in the first place. Why did this happen to me? Well, you broke this taboo, or you ate this impure food, or you violated, you sinned in this way. So you became sick, and I will heal, I will purify you. That the whole world of medicine. Why is there a storm? Why is there a natural disaster? Because you offended the gods, or because you offended God, whether they're monotheistic or polytheistic. And now we don't do that. We go to meteorologists when we want to know about the weather. We go to physicians when we want to know about illness. And so all of a sudden, things are getting more complicated. But as humans, we want simple explanations. We need simple explanations. And so what comes in to replace the good evil binary is natural unnatural. And it feels like it's not religious. It feels like it emerges from the natural world. But in fact, it is just another version of the same simple explanatory framework that can allow you to understand everything from why climate change is happening to why you fell ill with cancer or why your wife had trouble in her pregnancy. It all gets easily explained, if you don't think too hard about it, by the natural unnatural distinction.
It does. And it's interesting that we're very quick to offer a binary allocation to a meteorologist or a doctor. I've got a close friend who's a senior meteorologist in the UK, and he works for the Environment Agency there, and he's all about like flood defenses, flood warnings, all those sorts of things. And if you ask him to be honest, he'll say that actually what he's doing is best guessing. It's not actually being a meteorologist.
I lost you there for a second.
Oh, sorry.
Hopefully I can get back. There you are. You're back. Did you lose me?
I did a little bit, but we're all good. We're back now.
Okay, terrific. So tell me, you were going to just saying about the meteorologist.
Yeah, so he says if he's to be honest, that actually the meteorology he does, and he's very highly educated in it, really is the science of best guessing about weather.
Absolutely.
And if you go and speak to a physician, especially a neurologist, they'll tell you that they know quite a lot, but there's probably as much they don't know. And yet for the layperson, we say, right, we binary meteorologist, we binary physician with our label. Those people aren't often brave enough to put their egos to one side and go, hey, I know a lot, but I don't know everything. And so actually we end up making binary decisions around a false belief or false reality.
It's both the inability of people to say, I don't know, and the inability of the public to accept we don't know. I think it's both of those things that really drives these kind of binary certainties. The fact that the world is a very complicated place is not easy to accept. And so we have to impose these explanatory frameworks on it. And I would add to that, there's really good reasons to think that naturalness is like a godly value. I mean, just as all of your listeners and viewers know, the natural world is just crazily incredible. I keep all kinds of things from the natural world on my desk. All kinds. I'll show you one here. Here's one. There's many. This is a duckbill crystal from Canada, from Manitoba, and it looks like a golden snitch from Harry Potter. It cool. Just looks, it's incredible. I've got bookends with fossils in them that are hundreds of millions years old. And these, to think that forces made these things, made the mountains and the rivers and the creatures of the world. And again, I don't mean forces in a kind of divine way or undivine way. You take that however you want. That nature is the way it is without any intervention. It's hard to think of it as anything but a miracle. And yet, the fact that, to go back to this natural birth, the fact that those same forces created a childbirth process where, without any medical interventions, in pre-agricultural hunter-gatherer context, you had about a 1 in 4 chance of making it to 5 years old. Well, now nature seems abysmally atrocious and terrible and evil. So it's a miracle that you want to respect in all of its incredible glory, but it's also obviously awful, and you want to overcome it and not have to deal with the bad things. And that tension is very hard, I believe, to process and live with.
Yeah, I was just thinking then, you're then talking about like people who are advocating for things like the caveman diet. Oh, you want to eat the caveman diet. And I'm like, well, that's very interesting, but those guys had a much smaller IQ than me and they didn't live very long. why would I want to go and consume something that will decrease my lifespan and maybe even decrease my IQ? I don't know whether it's right or wrong, but people get blinkered by this idea of you want to do what's natural, put that natural food into your mouth. And I saw in the book you met Joel Salatin at his Polyface farm, and he's one of the most respected farmers on my list, and yet I'm aware that he compromises. So
well, how could he not? As he pointed out to me, I said, hey, are there any invasive species on your property? He says, well, all the plants we grow aren't native. All the animals he's farming have been bred. All his farmhouses are built. There's nothing natural about agriculture. Agriculture, according to the Old Testament, is what humans were punished with when they fell out of the Garden of Eden. It couldn't be less natural, and yet, because we need that word to sanctify our practices, Salatin has a definition of natural that elides or erases or ignores the unnatural features of what he's doing, and aligns it with what he calls God's plan or nature's plan, which for him, as for many religious people, are sort of synonymous. He ignores the features that are unnatural, manifestly unnatural, and focuses on those that are natural. So for him, it doesn't matter if he's built a barn to house his cows in winter, or he uses tractors or barbed wire or whatever it happens to be. That doesn't matter. That's still natural. What's unnatural, for example, for him, is genetically modifying things. So that he draws a kind of arbitrary line. Now, to the question of whether we should be genetically modifying foods or not, that's not really, as you know, what my book is about. What my book is about is pointing out that you can't answer that question by figuring out whether it's natural or unnatural. Some unnatural things are terrific, and some natural things, and I think the binary makes sense. There's a bunch of scientists who want to say we're all made out of stardust, everything is natural, which is absurd. New York City is less natural than Yellowstone Park. And what's valuable about Yellowstone Park is its naturalness. Is it purely natural? Well, of course not. People will quibble, oh, the mountain goats were introduced and the way that the bison were brought back is, sure, it's not perfect. I shouldn't have said perfect. It's not perfectly natural. But it's a lot closer to natural, that is uninterfered with by human beings, than New York City. And to the extent that conservation or environmentalism is conserving the natural world, we need that spectrum just to make sense of what it is that we care about. After all, if there's no such thing as natural, then trying to save a city would be just as much about environmental conservation as trying to save a local wetland, which is clearly absurd, right? So I believe in a spectrum of more or less natural. I just don't believe that we can figure out what's right or wrong or good or bad by placing something on that spectrum. As you said earlier, it depends. It depends.
And is there actually anything that really is natural anymore? A question, I don't know. I would get the impression that everything has been impacted by man's work or doing, even if it's just the hole in the ozone layer or the chemicals in the rain. I don't know. Everything has been on the globe has been impacted by man. So if you want to say maybe nothing is left as God intended it or God built it.
That's what. So I would be willing. There are some people who have said, look, with climate change, for example, or with our global impact on the environment and the oceans, nothing is truly natural anymore. And we could quibble with that. Perhaps if you go deep into a volcanic place where the temperatures are very high and there's just microbes, that maybe that looks exactly the way it did before humans ever existed. So to the extent that we're defining natural as totally untouched by human forces, there are probably places on Earth that look more or less like they would have looked if humans had never existed. But does that mean that somehow the world is less pure or good? I don't think so. I can imagine a world in which we have touched everything in a certain way, and that doesn't make it a worse world. That said, I believe that there is value to naturalness in the same way that there is value to old objects, to heirlooms, to history, to cultural artifacts. And so if you asked me, would I want a world in which everything were altered? Would I want to live on Jeff Bezos's satellite planet that's engineered to look just like a planet, but actually was made by humans? Or would I find that kind of tragic? I would find it tragic in the same way I would find it tragic if we got rid of all of our history and our old cultural monuments. So naturalness is valuable. One way to think about it, in the same way that history is valuable or historical artifacts are valuable. Sometimes do you need to get rid of old things? Of course, we do it all the time. But it would be tragic if we got rid of every old thing. And it would also be tragic if there weren't some places that uniquely preserved their heritage in a way that was much different from the rest of the world. That's what national parks are, to a certain extent. We've said, hey, there are these areas of the world that we just want to keep them the way they are, just because it's incredible. That's a value, like beauty or freedom. Naturalness of this place is valuable and extraordinary, and we want to keep that around. And it's worth pointing out that that's not the utilitarian argument for the natural world. Sometimes people will say, oh, you don't want to mess with the natural world because it'll be bad for humans. Climate change is bad because we'll drown, whatever it happens to be. But that's actually not that's not an argument for the value of naturalness. That's an argument for saving our skin. Yeah. An argument for the value. Do you see what I'm saying? I talked with a primatologist when I was at the Cleveland Zoo, and we were looking at these lemurs. You know lemurs. Yeah. They've got the big buggy eyes. They're just incredible creatures. And I said, a lot of environmental arguments are based on you don't want to mess up the ecosystem because that'll have this impact on humans, and there's this whole delicate balance that we don't want to mess with. So the lemurs are only in Madagascar. And Madagascar just disappeared entirely. We moved all the people off it. Nothing would happen to it's totally detached from other ecosystems. We can imagine a way in which the loss of lemurs would do nothing. So why do we want to keep the lemurs around? And I asked this sort of as a rhetorical question. She looks at me like I'm insane, because that is an insane question. She says, because look at them. Look at them. They're fucking incredible. And that was it. That was the end of the line. That was the argument for keeping lemurs around. That's it. And to the extent that I think that's a good argument.
I was going to say, it's a good enough argument because they're fucking incredible. Right, done, sold, I'm in.
That's it. And so I would like people to include naturalness among the other things that we value, like I said, beauty and freedom, and recognize that sometimes freedom is not purity. Sometimes we are less free, and that makes the world a better place. I am less free after this conversation because I'm going to go do something with my daughter that she wants me to do. But that doesn't mean that my life is therefore worse. In the same way, there are times when we restrict naturalness or alter nature, and that doesn't mean it's worse. It's just a complicated set of costs, trade-offs between the things that we love. And that's where I've landed when it comes to nature and naturalness.
How do we help people? So man has got this inbuilt desire to grow, evolve, develop, so on and so forth. And often when men do that, or man rather does that, or humans do that at speed, they often do that at a sacrifice of something that is natural, or I don't even know if I can use the word natural anymore. But
sure, the word's a great word.
Something that's in nature. So, rivers get polluted, trees get cut down, big holes get put in the earth to pull out minerals, whatever it might be. How do people go about striking that balance between the natural desire to evolve and grow without ending up in a shit or bust survival situation where actually we've evolved so much we don't actually have a planet left to habitate anymore?
The way I conclude the book, because it gets more and more complicated, which is not very satisfying. the way I conclude the book is that rather than making a decision, having a heuristic in advance for how you decide these things, you answer it by looking at the particular context of the question. You can't answer that question without looking at what the ditch is for. What are you building there? And why are you building it? And what other options exist? And what in the natural world is going to be lost? And all of those questions are going to be answered in different ways. It also depends on the culture. There might be a particular animal in an area. A great example of this is the debate over building telescopes in Hawaii. I don't know if you followed this. So there are astronomers who want to build these telescopes, and this actually has happened in a couple other places, on indigenous holy land in Hawaii. And there was this debate about, well, should we build the telescope there? It's getting in the way of this land, but it'll give us a better sense of the natural world, but will also destroy this part of this area that's valuable to people. I'm not going to tell you that I have an answer, because I don't. But what I do think the answer is you have to sit down with all of the people who have stakes in this debate and listen to each other. You have to listen to the people. And in the case of nature, you have to listen to people who understand nature and value nature. This is what people who make nature documentaries are doing. They're saying to us, look at this beautiful thing. Look at this valuable world. I want you to understand its value, so that if you choose to go ahead and destroy parts of it anyway, you're not doing it without a deep respect of what is being lost. You can destroy we destroy things. We take down buildings in cities that are to make room for housing that will allow people to no longer be on the streets. It's a difficult decision. I guess what I would want to say is make damn sure that it's difficult. Don't not listen to people who care, and don't ignore the tremendous value of the natural world, but also don't deceive yourself into thinking that every time we destroy a part of nature, it's necessarily evil or a bad decision. It always depends on that contextual framework. And the same thing is true, incidentally, for natural birth, for natural food, for natural sports, whatever it happens to be. You need to think hard, and also, I would say, think clearly. You need to be able to be clear with yourself and with the people that are helping make these decisions about what it is that you value when you value natural birth, what it is that you value when you value a particular grove of trees or a particular species of animal. And having clarity on that, rather than turning it into a binary of pure and impure, is also extremely helpful for making those decisions.
So there's almost a mixture of like understanding the butterfly effect or the ripple effect. If I do X, here's the logical sequence of consequences that may or may not happen through my actions. But I can see a place where people get lost in that as well, because when you're trying to self-educate yourself to make that decision, good old Dr. Google out there, you go and chuck something in there and you get 6 million pages and 500,000 articles all on the same topic. And everything is, all of those articles, but as you said, with your editors for the book, like they want a binary thing. So all of those Google articles are binary. They're like, no, natural birth is the way forwards. Do it like this. Or don't build near rivers because that will screw up the river ecosystem. And then 5 articles later, you go, yes, build near rivers, because then you can go and encourage beavers back into the river and do some environmental work. And I just see that the reason why people are looking to abdicate individual responsibility is because almost like it's too hard to actually make a sensible decision yourself.
These are very difficult issues, and when issues become complicated, it is increasingly hard for individuals to feel like they have the expertise to make the decision, the information to make the decision, which itself is alienating, because it's in another way it's saying, well, no, what you are too stupid, or you are too ill-informed. And I felt like this writing the book. I was constantly asking these experts questions, and as you said, often getting different answers or sort of relative answers. And yet, one thing I kept coming back to was that it wasn't a matter. I realized that there was never a right decision necessarily in terms of what you end up deciding, but there was a right way to come to the decision. In fact, I was happy with decisions not based on the outcome, because sometimes the best informed decisions turn out badly. I was happy when I had listened, when I felt like I had been generous to the problem, when I had listened, really listened to people, not gone in with a prejudged, and really felt like I had tried genuinely to understand the perspectives that had gone into whatever it was. And then I made my decision. Was I completely sure when I make that decision? No. Could that decision change 3 months from now if I hear something else or I'm informed in a different way? Absolutely. And what I would say to people is that's okay. It's okay to change your mind about something. You don't have to look back on your previous decision and say, I'm wrong, if the way that you evaluate your wrongness isn't by the outcome, but by the process that you used to achieve that outcome. At the end of the day, that's something I'm more certain about. Look at the natural world. Try to really understand why people love it and value it. Think about why people value natural birth. I mean, I can't tell you how skeptical I was going in. And after talking to people who chose natural birth, women who would say, look, I just wanted to feel like I was connected in this primal way to all of the generations of women that stretch back into the mists of time before me. I felt like the pain might actually bond me to my child. I wanted to feel empowered, that the forces were those that were already natural to me rather than a doctor coming in artificially and interfering. Hey, I was really moving. I understood it. Now, at the end of the day, if I knowing all of that, would my wife and I choose to have a natural birth? I don't think that we would, but I also know that we wouldn't be as quick to dismiss people who make that choice. And it was the process of listening generously that helped me overcome kind of being an asshole, frankly. If you don't need to be right, then being right is no longer the criteria of good decision. I know that sounds stupid because people who listen to this are gonna be like, well, that's well and good, but don't you want to know whether the lake you're gonna get rid of is actually important to the environment? Or don't you want to know whether that food is actually gonna hurt you? Sure, of course, that's gonna be a part of what motivates your decision. But as you said, even the experts, it's probabilistic, it's best guesses. So you're going to make your best guess. But as a meteorologist, it's your method that you really care about. You have to be honest about the data. You have to analyze it as best you can. And then if it turns out that your guess is wrong, the guess might have been wrong, but the approach was still right. And that's what I think is most important with how we evaluate nature and naturalness.
I agree. One of the things I respect most about my father, is in the UK, he rarely votes for the same political party twice, or twice in a row. He's very much, and when I was a little kid, he was a member of the Conservative Party, which is like the UK's version of the Republicans. He had the card, he had the badge, he went to fancy meetings, so on and so forth. And I don't know what's changed, and it's a conversation I want to have. But it's very obvious at election season, like he reads every person, every party's manifesto. What are they doing? What are they talking about? What are they planning on doing for the next cycle? And those that he votes for the party he believes will do the very best job for the next cycle, based upon where we are now and where he believes will be good for us to go to. But at the end of that cycle, he may well vote for somebody else because they've got the next best idea for the next cycle. But that's very brave to do.
And well, I'll tell you right now, there are listeners in the United States as the election comes up who are thinking, well, that's well and good, but sometimes you really have good and evil. And you have to vote. Sometimes both sides don't have a good point, or sometimes, and true, I guess, to my own philosophy, I would say that it depends, and sometimes it doesn't depend. That's a part of embracing it depends is understanding that there are certain cultural moments in which you will really feel like there is a clearly good decision and a clearly bad decision, and in those moments, again, there's the same thing with the environment. People say, look, with climate change, there are people who are conservationists. There's no, well, I wonder what's right in this particular context. We all have to mobilize behind this very important issue. And in those contexts, well, that's fine too, if as long as you've gotten there through generous considering of the facts and listening to people, and that's where you land, then you're confident in your decision. One thing I as someone who is politically liberal personally, one thing I was struck by talking with conservationists and biologists and ecologists was just how interesting the resemblance was. I'm actually writing a piece about this. It's coming up, an essay, a review of a book called Tales of Two Planets, which is stories about climate change from across the world, fiction and nonfiction. And I'm reviewing this book, and one of the things I'm thinking about is the extent to which there's an interesting kind of conservatism built into the conservation movement. I mean, obviously it's right there in the word, but conservationists who tend by and large to be associated with political liberal people have a great deal of respect for the wisdom of ecosystems. They will say things like there's a harmony that you don't want to disrupt, that the wisdom of the ages has been conserved in the systems we have today. And there's a kind of hubris if we just go in and change it all because we think we have a better approach. And I heard this enough where I started thinking, if you just swap out ecosystem for political system, that's exactly how conservatives sound. They say, you don't want to have revolutions, you don't want to have quick changes because these political systems, you don't know what kind of butterfly effects there are. You make all these big radical changes very quickly, and who knows what kinds of downstream consequences there are going to be. Better to change things slowly and carefully with a healthy respect for the conserved wisdom of the past. I'm not convinced to be a political conservative by thinking about that yet, but I am more sympathetic to ideas that I once would have dismissed as part of a binary that these ideas are on the other side and I'm on this side. It forced me, and it was uncomfortable to see a kind of kinship, the yin and the yang, if you will, to go back to the Chinese philosophy, where it's not just a binary, there's a little bit of each side and the other side. And that recognition, I think that symbol it's a cliche, but it's a cliche because it's incredibly powerful. It's not just a coin. It's that there are these interlocking symbols and each side has a little bit of the other side inside of it. There's a kind of, I don't know, a deep sort of humility that forces itself on you when you try to think in that kind of way. And I'm grateful for it, even if sometimes it alienates people who I otherwise identify with politically. At the end of the day, I feel better about how I think about things, not just politics, but also the natural world.
It's true. And, people talk very heavily around the topic of sort of individual accountability and individual responsibility. Actually, interestingly, politically, both parties talk about that extensively, just in different ways. I don't know whether this has changed or it was never in the education system, but it strikes me that the education system that kids go through is very binary. It is, I was with a group of teenagers before lockdown, so crikey, that's about 4 or 5 months ago now, and I was doing some work with them, and I was saying, like, you know that 2 + 2 doesn't have to make 4. 2 + 2 could make 3 or make 5. And their heads, it would look like I'd taken Mike Tyson and punched them all on the nose. Do you know what I mean? It was that sort of blank look. And then we start playing with maths, and I'm like, well, you can, 2.4 is still 2. So if we did 2.4 plus 2.4, we get 4.8, which is therefore 5. So 2 + 2 doesn't have to make, and it was almost like they'd been conditioned in a way to just go, 2 + 2 is always 4. I'm 14 or 15 years old. That's the answer, period. And it really worried me at that point in time. Do I want my daughter to go through an education system where she can't see gray? She can see black or she can see white, but she can't compute gray. has that, or do you think that's always been the case in education? Has it changed with religious pressures, or?
No, I don't think it's really, I think it's a part of what it is to be a human being, because gray, this goes back to sort of idea of cognitive load. Gray is very difficult to deal with. It means uncertainty. It means a lack of simplicity. And sometimes there are going to be people listening to this who say, well, if everything's gray, how can you make any decisions? What do you say? What are you saying? Are you saying that we never know if murder is right or wrong? Are you saying that everything is relative? And the answer to those questions for me is no. I'm not saying that everything is relative. I'm saying that I am constantly asking questions about the values that I hold. Those values are not relative. I believe in being kind to my daughter and my wife. And I believe that very, very, very strongly. But how I am kind and what that might mean is going to change. In part, maybe my daughter and my wife will give me feedback, as I'm sure they will, on the relative effectiveness of my kindness. Maybe I will switch from a tough love approach to a more kindly, generous approach. The meaning of seeing gray is not insisting that there's no such thing as right or wrong. It's being open to revising the sense of right or wrong that you happen to have. And it's a small difference, but it's important. Another thing I wanted to say about these political binaries that relates directly to the nature theme of the book is that I found, contrary to popular political belief, that a reverence for the natural world crosscuts politics. It is very difficult to find anyone, in my experience, who doesn't love naturalness in some form or another, whether it's someone who likes to go fishing, or whether it's someone who likes to go on hikes, or whether it's someone who likes to get out in their garden, or whatever it happens to be, they collect rocks. Everyone I know, with virtually no exceptions, has some reverence for nature and the natural world. And to the extent that I think overcoming our differences through a shared sense of spiritual or cosmic values is important, nature really is a good place to do that. It is a place that seems to transcend political difference. It's like food and sports, right? You break bread and that's a good way to overcome difference. You compete in the Olympics and that's when everyone suspends everything and you marvel at the natural world. And that is a place where, even though we have differences about how to do it, and even though it gets complicated when it comes to whose version of the natural world and how do we balance that with a need for economic development, all those questions are complicated, but we can still find common ground. And there's a story I want to tell. When I got to Yellowstone, when I first arrived, I got in the cab in Montana. Montana's a pretty conservative state. I got in the cab from the airport to the place I was going to pick up my gear, my bear spray and the tent and all that stuff. And I'm talking with the guy and we're going back and forth. And I noticed on his phone, I could see that he had a bunch of politically conservative apps on it. I mean, really politically conservative apps, I could tell. There was an Alex Jones app, an InfoWars app, there was a Fox News app. And I said, oh no, this guy, he probably hunts, he hates the environment, blah, blah, blah. And so I sort of clammed up and I stopped talking. I made all these assumptions about this guy. And he recognized that I had somehow stopped talking. He just drove me to the place. And at one point he says, you're going to see a bison on the road. You know what you do when you see a bison on the road? And I said, oh no, this monster, what's he going to say? He's going to say accelerate or shoot it. He said, you wait your turn because this is their home. Don't honk. Just be patient. All of us, I just realized what I'd been doing, what my brain had done. And it simultaneously, I felt bad. And also I felt great hope for how this creature in this place, extraordinary place, could, the nature writers of the 20th century, many of whom were libertarian in interesting ways. There's The Holy Earth by L.H. Bailey is this very sort of small government conservative. We should leave the protection of the environment, not to the government, but to local farmers, that kind of thing. That reverence for the natural world was something that did transcend political boundaries, and the binary makers have tried to divide us. But there's a power to the majesty of the natural world that I think can overcome those binary makers, and that's a wonderful thing.
Well, there's immense equality in the outdoors. I often say when I'm training guides and coaches and leaders in the outdoors, it's very equal, the outdoors. It doesn't matter whether you're male or female, gay or straight, black or white, liberal, conservative, Democrat. The outdoors doesn't care. When it rains, we're all going to get wet.
That's a part of the beauty. That's the thing. This natural unnatural spectrum. We need values to make politics. We need politics is not a natural thing. We need to make all these decisions. We need these categories. But exactly as you're saying, this is a place where you don't have to have those categories, that allows you to get outside of those categories. And to the extent that that's a place where you can live in the gray with other people, with whom outside of nature you would not be living in the gray with them, you would be on one side of a binary opposing them. Gosh, what a wonderful thing.
It's very interesting. Through my work over the past 20 plus years, I'm getting old, maybe even longer than 20 years. We won't go there. Maybe even close to 30. And we won't go there either. Maybe close to 30 years. My maths is terrible. I've had the privilege of working with, in different settings, a lot of very high performing individuals, be it multi-millionaires who are self-made, C-suite people in Fortune sort of top 10 companies, Olympic athletes. And it's incredible that they often talk publicly in binary, but when you actually get them to one side and start talking to them really, and you get into depth like this, you actually find out that the most successful people on planet Earth, in my opinion, are very content permanently living in gray. And they'll choose black or white, not race, but like the options from gray, and go, right, okay, well, black is the best decision for the next 3 weeks because that's what's most likely to be needed, but we might be at white in 3 weeks' time. And they're permanently going backwards and forwards. And I don't know where they learnt that from. Is it nature? It's as you say, it's not natural because the brain doesn't particularly want you to live there. It's almost a little bit self-persecuting to hold yourself there for a long time because your cognitive load gets exhausted quite quickly. But it is a performance criteria of those Olympic gold medalists, the self-made person who's worth $500 million. It's a definite noticeable trait.
It's valuable, not just for traditional metrics of success, I believe, but more, I don't know, down to earth metrics of success, like how comfortable are you interacting with other people? How difficult is it when something challenges your preconceived notions of the way something should be? When you lock yourself into a binary, it can be traumatic to encounter challenges to that binary. And this relates to what you said earlier, which I think is smart, which is that in the short term, the binaries feel good, like the junk food. But in the long term, they can be very unhealthy. They can turn you in the long term in excess. Binaries, like ultra processed foods, are only bad in excess. But when you have them in excess, they can make it so that you're not capable of dealing with the everyday challenges that are presented to you. Obviously, food does that in a different way to your body than binaries do it to your spirit or your soul. But as I like to say, if you cover your soul with a bunch of bumper stickers, and then you discover that you've changed your mind, it's very, very difficult to peel them off. Bumper stickers are not easily removed. And better to, well, as soon as I say better, then I'm locking myself into some kind of binary. So I speak for myself. I am more comfortable lately not doing that, being careful with that kind of thing. And to the extent that I just see people doing that. I mean, I went to Peru. I went to Peru, as you know from the book, because everyone talks about you got to raise your kids naturally, or the hunter-gatherers who are close to nature live this sort of charmed life. So I got to see it for myself. So I'm not a professional anthropologist, so I found that the Matagenga in Peru are the closest I could get to people who have remained in nature. And long story short, obviously there's a lot more to it in here, but those people themselves, yes, they love nature, but they also don't think of it as a barometer of what's good. When they had lights installed, I love this. This is another story I love to tell. They had lights installed in the main area of where they were settled, solar lights, so you could see. And I was talking to one of the villagers, and I said to him, "So, how do you feel about these lights? Do you like them? Does it block the stars at night?" He just looked at me like I was nuts. He says, they're nice. I like them. I can see at night now, and here I am. What a crazy, to him, well, of course I like it. I'm thinking this natural, unnatural. Oh my gosh, you brought in this unnatural lighting, because I know from my place in my world that perhaps we've gone too far, that perhaps we have forgotten about the beauty of the stars because we can't see them in our cities. But I took that too far. And I ended up thinking naively that everyone would understand that electric lights of any kind always pose a kind of problem. They're always a desecration, which is silly. The village shaman, he had a cell phone. It's not, it depends. He desperately wants to preserve the natural world where they live that's being encroached on by development. But he also understands that having a cell phone might be a good way to do that. And also, why not bring some salt in from the outside to make the food taste a little better? Very, very complicated situation. But if everyone listens to each other and at least considers the virtue of overcoming binaries, whatever decisions we end up making, I think in looking back on them, we'll be happier about them, even if they failed. It's just like people are happier. You can have a democratic decision, and that may be the wrong decision. And a tyrant may have made a better decision in that given moment. But that's not how we evaluate government. We evaluate government, at least those who like democracy, on the process, that we did it together, that we felt empowered. If we made a mistake, we made it together. If we did it right, we did it together. There's not just someone taking away our freedom. And that's important.
It's very important. And it's what you're really saying, I think, in some of that, especially with the guys in Peru, is it's context based, but also based on the life experiences and desires of the individual human being. I've got a funny story that I'll share with you. I spent a lot of time kayaking in the Himalayas when I was younger. I lived there for about 2.5 years, and just going whitewater kayaking pretty much every day, sometimes for a day, other times for weeks at a time. And we're about 10 days into a trip, living out of our whitewater kayaks, and we pull up on a beach, and we haven't had any meat protein for the whole of those 10 days. And we're kind of getting to the point where it would be nice to have some. And there's a local Nepali guy there, a farmer. And so we bought 2 chickens off him for our little group. And he gave him some money, and he was delighted. And one of my friends, who shall remain nameless, said to him, "Do you have any ganja? Do you have any marijuana?" And he looked a bit confused and then disappeared. And we thought, oh, well, there we are. There's none of that coming our way today. It'd been quite a dry trip, I think would be the best way to describe it. Anyway, he turned up a little while later and had 2 plastic bags. They are plastic in Nepal, in the middle of nowhere. He had 2 plastic bags, large plastic bags, big plastic bags, full of grass, full of marijuana. Yeah. And he gave it to my friend, and my friend said, "Well, and how much money?" And he said, "Oh, no, you bought chickens." Now, in our model of the world, if you'd have had that much marijuana in the UK, A, you'd have been in jail very quickly because it's illegal in the UK, or B, you'd have been worth a lot of money if you'd have sold it. but it comes back to that. We try and make a decision to conform, like natural or unnatural, to fit in, I suppose. And actually, we can't fit in. It's almost physically impossible to fit in, because if I fit in my, I don't know, organic food buying decisions in America, I'm actually going against decisions that Zimbabweans may well make, who are starving today, because frankly, their decision is just to eat. They don't care organic or not organic. They just care food. And so you can't make decisions to fit in. I don't believe it's possible.
Well, and I hate to try to mind read people, so apologies to people out there who feel like I'm trying to mind read them. But I know from my experience working on food, which is something I wrote a book about food before I wrote this book on natural. There are some people who I've interviewed who would immediately say the reason those Zimbabweans are starving is because our unnatural food systems have taken away from them their local crops. We introduced non-local crops. If you go back 300 years, everything was fine, but then climate change and non-local monoculture has resulted in a world where people starve. That is what one set of people will say. So they will easily fit that problem into the natural unnatural binary. And there are other people, the sort of techno-futurists, for whom nature is wholly evil and meant to be overcome, who will say, well, that's exactly why we need genetically modified crops. And the more people let go of their bias towards organic, the more we will be able to save the starving people of the world through our technological dominance of nature, which is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, in short. To both of those people, I would say, perhaps it's not so easy. Perhaps it's not so easy. Perhaps we can't slot the problem of people starving into an easy, well, it's because we're too unnatural as humans, or because we need more technology. Perhaps it's more complicated than that. And that's something that can be difficult to accept, but the more time you spend in the natural world, especially, again, getting outdoors, what a great tension. It's like sports, because sports, like getting outdoors, is another area of our life where we celebrate the natural. Sports doesn't make sense completely unless you understand it as, in part, a celebration of natural human talent. The reason we ban certain kinds of drugs, the reason we ban shoes with springs, the reason we regulate swimsuits instead of allowing people to wear outboard motors, is because what we mean by swimming is what the human body does in water unassisted. And of course, there are forms of assistance like goggles that we allow and swimsuits that we allow. That's the compromise. And the same is true for enjoying the natural world. You said you went kayaking. There's a kayak. I assume your kayak was made out of some kind of synthetic material.
Plastic.
You had all kinds of gear that allowed you to get to wherever you needed to go when you were kayaking. But at the same time, I am sure that part of what you valued about that experience was your closeness to the natural world. You would have been disappointed, in other words, if you had gotten to wherever you went in Nepal and someone said to you, actually, this river, it was made by the Nepalese government to attract tourists. You would probably have said to yourself, all right, I'll kayak it, but that's not really what I'm here for. In fact, when people visit lakes, often what they'll ask is this a man-made lake? Or is this a natural lake? To the extent that our experience of the outdoors is something magical and valuable and transcendent, there's that paradox again. We need unnatural means of getting there and enjoying it. But if it were fully unnatural, it wouldn't be the thing that we're enjoying.
I don't know where this fits, but if it was fully, if I was to pursue going to Nepal in a fully natural way, I never would have had the opportunity to go. I mean, you had to go and buy a flight with a credit card and get on a plane just for starters. I mean, it's that simple.
The whole thing is so complicated. The idea that you're buying natural foods when you go to the supermarket is, with just a moment's reflection, utterly absurd. The market is air conditioned, the food is refrigerated, it's been trucked at the very least from the local farm that you're so proud of having purchased from. It's vegetables that didn't grow naturally, and the whole of it is unnatural from top to bottom. And yet, I go to the farmer's market, and I like thinking that my food is more natural. And what I mean by more natural in that context, there's a spectrum, is there was less human interference involved with its production. So it's not that it wasn't unnatural, that the plants weren't bred, that the farmers didn't raise them, but that they were raised on the land that was around me, that I know the person that grew them, and there wasn't a lot of mediation. I'm closer to it in a way. And I think what naturalness means in other contexts, not the natural world, but with food, I think what it means is something like, I feel like this is transparent to me. I feel like I am close to this. I feel like I understand how it was produced. And you know what? Who am I to say that? I value that. Those are things I care about. And if what people mean when they say natural food is something like, I value food where I feel like I know where it came from, and I know the origin story of that food. I know the person who produced it, and I can even imagine how it was grown. It wasn't grown on some giant mega farm. It was grown in a way that fits inside my capacity to understand. Well, that's nice. That's a nice thing. It's nice to feel like you are putting something into your body where its mode of production was transparent to you. So that's fine. Just don't say something like, I'm also going to live for 100 years because I ate it, or this is pure and all the other stuff is impure. Just be clear about what it is that you value and why you value it. And we'll all be able to understand each other and ourselves better.
There's a presupposition in neuro-linguistic programming that goes something like, I've got to get this right, but doing the very best you can with what you've got based upon the circumstances that you're in. And I really like it. You know, I'm a very law-abiding person. However, the speed limits became slightly irrelevant when my wife's water broke.
Yes. Indeed.
I'm like, I do not want you giving birth. Luckily, it went on for 22 hours, as I said. But in my head, I'm like, I do not want you giving birth in my house with just me here. I do not want you giving birth in the car with just me here. I want to get you to that hospital with that unnatural medical professional as quickly as humanly possible. And so, like, I had to adapt my values temporarily to break the law to go and achieve that outcome for myself. Yeah, cool. Alan, thank you for your time today. If people want to engage with you, where's the best place for them to go hang out?
Gosh, well, I love being on Twitter, where I try to overcome the binaries that are encouraged by social media through conversations. I'm on Twitter at AlanLevinovitz, and they can find my books. I wrote a book about food and religion and the ways in which we make religious decisions about food, called The Gluten Lie, which is not what the title implies. And then also, of course, my book, Natural. But yes, find me online, give me a shout out. I'd really appreciate it. I always appreciate feedback by email. If you just Google my name, I come up on James Madison University's website. And, I'm really grateful to be on this show, especially because I haven't gotten to talk as much as I would like with people who do value nature. There's a lot of people who want to talk about why valuing natural food doesn't make sense, or why valuing natural birth doesn't make sense. But I wish I had more of an opportunity to talk about my own changes in perspective on how naturalness is valuable. And this really gave me a chance, because people who care about the outdoors, they're among those who understand that better than anyone else in the world. And that's it's so important that I don't want that to get lost in the debunking of nature as God. You don't have to worship nature, but you can still love it. And that's tremendously important.
That's super cool. Well, maybe we can have a round 2 at some point in time. I've still got 2 pages of questions to go through. So
that would be great if the audience wants to do it and you're up for it. It would be an absolute privilege and a delight.
It would be superb. It would be superb. Alan, thank you for your time, and thank you for your brave message around, frankly, it depends, in a time where everybody is trying to find absolutes. It just depends. Thank you, sir.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.